Okay, class, this is going to be a short video on how to quote lines of poetry, how to introduce a quote, how to do works cited sources, and look at the Century Library. So let's take a little bit look here on how to quote a paper. So let's start off with that. How to quote. Here we are at the top. The basics here is this is kind of like a math formula right here. And this is how you're going to do all your quotes, whether it's from your poem or from the outside source. So first you're going to introduce the quote, and then you're going to give the quote, then you're going to give the citation, then you're going to explain the quote. So no matter what quote you're doing, you're going to follow this basic pattern right here. So the basics here, introduce the quote, give the quote, give the citation, and explain the quote. So for example here, in John Keats' poem, that's an introduction. He uses metaphor and simile here, comma. You give the quote, put the quotation marks. You give this is what we call the citation right here at the end, and then you explain the quote, which is right here. So introduce the quote, give the quote here, citation here, and then this is explaining the quote. So again, almost like a math formula, those are the four steps that you're going to do. So you always want to introduce it by either going in John Keats' poem, or you could say in Keats' poem if you've already said John Keats' poem before, and introduce it a little bit, kind of give us a preview of kind of what you're talking about. He uses metaphor and simile here, and then give us the comma that's right there, give us the quotation marks, and then give us the citation. And this citation just means the what lines of the poem that it comes from, because when you're quoting from the poem, the numbers that you give in the citation here, you're referring to the lines of the poem that it comes from. So if your poem was 15 lines long, this would be you'd be quoting from lines 10, 11, and 12 here. And then, of course, you explain the quote there as well. So another point here, after you give the citation, you put the period at the end of the citation. So I'll take points off for that if you don't get that right. So the period does not go inside the quotations. It does not go outside the quotations. The period goes at the end of the citations, all right? So introduce the poem, comma, do the quotations, give the citation, and put the period at the end. So here's another example right here of if you're working with an outside source and you're quoting from them. So according to John Johnson, editor of the Harvard Journal, that's the introduction here, he states, and then you give the quote, you give the citation, and then you go on to explain what that quote means. So again, with the outside source, you're introducing who the person is. You're giving us why is this person important. Well, this person's from the Harvard Journal. And then you go, he states, blah, 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 comma, give the quotation mark, give the citation, and he tells the importance of and explaining it. So again, a citation here, when you're working with an outside source, will just say what page of the article or the website that came from. If it's from a website and there are no pages, just put one, and that will denote that it comes from the first page of the website, or it was only a one-page document. So that's what that means. So again, whether it's you're quoting from the poem or an outside source, you follow the basics up there as well. And one of my rules that I have is don't end a paragraph with a quote. Always explain the quote and how it ties into your essay and thesis. Some of the examples that I might have in content, the example essay I give may actually do that, but I was always told don't end with a quote. And the reason why you don't want to end with a quote is because if you end with a quote and you don't explain it, and I don't think it makes sense, and I think you just slapped it in there for the heck of it, then I'm going to take off points because I'll just think that you just threw that quote in there for the heck of it. You always want to explain how the quote ties in with your thesis or what you're talking about or explaining it or whatever. So I want you to always explain your quote, because so that way I know you know what you're talking about. So again, don't end a paragraph with a quote. And just in general, that's probably a pretty good idea. So okay, so that's quoting. So if there's any questions on that, um, you can certainly ask me about that. So and one more thing about quoting. For example, let's take a look at this example right here. He directly compares poetry with writing and digging as his ancestors did. And here they use a colon, that's fine. Sometimes you can use a comma or a colon right before you start the quote. Either is fine. But notice when you're introducing a quote, or when you're giving a quote here, notice these little hash marks that they're giving right here. So between my finger and my thumb, hash mark, the squat pen rest, hash mark, I'll dig with it. So why are they doing that? Why are they doing the hash marks? Because that's denoting different lines from the poem. If you notice, the citation here is 29, 30, and 31. That's the lines of the poem. So here's line 29, here's line 30, and then here's line 31. So for every line of poetry, you put a hash mark in there. So for example, if you were doing Langston Hughes here, and say you were going to quote these 3 lines in your paper, and you put in, but it was there then in front of me, bright like a sun. When you quote that in your paper, you'd put a hash mark at the end of then, you'd put a hash mark at the end of me, and you'd put a hash mark at the end of sun. So again, that's what these little hash marks mean. You have to put that in there when you're quoting lines of poetry, because otherwise it looks like it's just a regular quote from a regular article or something like that, and it's not what that is. So you have to include these little hash marks right here. All right. So again, between my finger and my thumb, hash mark, that denotes the end of line 29 and the beginning of line 30. The squat pen rests, and then the hash mark, and that denotes the end of 30 and the beginning of 31 here as well. So again, that's another thing that I'll take off points for, and that's just basically, if you're not paying attention or if you don't really care, then those are points I'm going to nail you on. So make sure you get that right, because it's important for you to get this right. Introduce the quote, give the quote, do it correctly, give the citation, and put the period at the end. And again, the beginning, you can either put a comma or a colon there. It doesn't really matter. But again, make sure you do the hash mark. Alright, I'm going to end this video right here since I don't want to make this video too long. I'll do the works cited and sources on the other video. So go ahead and watch that one, and I will catch up with you in a very quick